الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد الصادق الوعد الأمين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. آمين يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. Inshallah, today what I want to speak about is, according to many scholars, the greatest woman in Islam. And it is the mother of Isa alayhi salam, Maryam salamullah alayha. And Allah describes Maryam in the Quran. And Maryam's parents, her mother Hannah and her father Imran, they didn't have a child for a very long time. And both of them, they actually wanted a son. They wanted a son. And eventually the mother of Maryam, she became pregnant, but she gave birth to a girl. And when she gave birth to a girl, after that she turned to Allah and she said, Rabbi inni wada'tuha untha. Oh Allah, I've given birth to a girl. She was expecting and she wanted a boy, but she gave birth to a girl. So she turned to Allah and said, I've given birth to a girl. And Allah responds to her in the Quran and He says, Wallahu a'lamu bima wada'at. Allah knows exactly what you have given birth to. And Allah a'lam ismu tafdeel, Allah is more knowing of what He has given you than you are. In other words, when Allah gives you something, know that Allah has given you that particular baby, that particular gender, for a specific reason. And that's something that Allah knows. And there are things that Allah knows that you don't know. So be happy about it. That's what the message was for the mother of Maryam. In any case, Maryam's father passes away, and the prophet of the time, Zakaria alayhi salam, he assumes the responsibility to take care of her. So he builds for her a small mihrab, and Maryam lives there all the time. And the only person that has access to Maryam is Zakaria alayhi salam. So she lives there, she sleeps there, she prays there. The Quran says that whenever Zakaria would step inside the mihrab to see if Maryam is okay, because he's of course caring for her, he is her father figure. So when he would step inside, the Quran says Zakaria, he would find fruits that don't even grow in that season. He would find out of season fruits. And not just once, but every time. And Zakaria is thinking that I'm the only one who has access to you. And I'm the only one who gives you food. Then how do you have fruits that don't even grow in this season? So he says to her, قَالَ يَا مَرْيَمُ أَنَّا لَكِ هَذَا. Maryam, where do these come from? And she responds and she says, قَالَتْ هُوَ مِنْ عِنْدِ اللَّهِ. These fruits have come directly from Allah. It's baffling if you think about it. It's a miracle. How Maryam salamullah alayha, she had a direct supply of food from Allah, from the skies. That's how close she was to Allah. But what I really want to share is what happened later in life. Many years later, she was again in that room, and Jibreel, he visits her. Jibreel visits her and he brings a message and he says that you, Maryam, will give birth to a child. And she says, what are you talking about? I'm 15, 16, I'm not married. And the Quran describes this. She says, Lam yamsasni bashar. No man has ever touched me. What are you talking about that I'm going to give birth to a child? And Jibreel says, look, I'm only a messenger. This is a decision that your Rabb made. You will be giving birth to a child. This is how your Lord decreed, and this is how it's going to happen. So when she was told that she was going to give birth to a child, she begins to think, and she says that my community, they think that I am a woman very close to Allah. They think that I am the most pious woman. And they know that I'm not married. And they also know that my father figure, the person that was responsible for bringing me up, was none other than the Prophet of the time, Zakaria alayhi salam. When I have a child and I go back to them, what will they think? What will they assume of me? And this is what is bothering her. And she's taken down by these thoughts. And for those who have sisters and mothers, for a woman, there is nothing more degrading, nothing more humiliating than having a child in your arms and someone saying to you, that child is a wedlock child. That child isn't legitimate. Nothing more degrading. So this is what she's thinking, that I've lived a life of piety and how am I being tested? So in these thoughts, she turns to Allah and she makes dua. And when she feels the pain of birth, the pain of labor, when that reaches her, she makes dua to Allah and she says, Ya laytani mittu qabla hadha. I wish only if I could die before this happens. Mittu qabla hadha. I could die before this embarrassment, before having to see fingers pointed at me by my very nation, by the very nation that thought I was the most pious woman. And not only does she wish for death, she goes one step further and she says, وَكُنْتُ نَسْيًا مَنْسِيًّا. I wish that I die and I wish that I am deeply forgotten. Ibn Kathir, under this ayah, he says, أَيْ لَمْ أُخْلَقْ. As in, she says, I wish I was never created. Qatada talks about this verse and he says, she's saying that, Ya Allah, I don't just want to die, but after I die, I wish that no one ever remembers that there was a woman called Maryam. No one ever thinks about me. I'm deeply forgotten. Like no one knows there was someone that named Maryam that existed. This is what she's saying to Allah. And these are her feelings. Ibn Kathir, under this, he says, وَفِيهِ دَلِيلٌ عَلَى جَوَازِ تَمَنَّ الْمَوْتِ. He says, from this ayah, we can infer that it is permissible to desire death in exceptional circumstances. Of course, it's not permissible to seek death, but he said in your heart, in exceptional circumstances, it is permissible to desire death. That's what Ibn Kathir says. But whenever we go through such circumstances, divorces, depression, right, losing a job, all of our challenges and our trials where we may think that I can't handle this anymore, we need to take comfort from the story of Maryam salamullah alayha and how she handled it. So the Quran tells us that she ends up giving birth to a child. And she أَتَتْ بِهِ قَوْمَهَا تَحْمِلُ. Maryam goes back to her nation carrying her child. And all her nation gather around. Her people gather around. And they say to Maryam, they say, لَقَدْ جِئْتِ شَيْئًا فَرِيًّا. Maryam, what have you done? What have you just done? Ya ukhta Harun, you were the sister of Harun. Now Harun was a prophet, right? And one explanation is that Harun was a prophet, so very close to Allah, and he was known for his piety. So they said that you were the sister of Harun. As in, just as Harun was so close to Allah, we thought you were exactly like Harun, very close to Allah. But what have you done? You weren't married. How did you have a child? مَا كَانَ أَبُوكِ امْرَأَ سَوْءٍ. Your father wasn't like this. You were brought up under the tutelage of Zakaria. What have you done? And again, Ibn Kathir, he says that before Maryam gave birth to that child, her nation thought of her as a zahida, an abida, and salihah, a pious woman, a worshipping woman. And after she gave birth, the very nation, they thought of her as an ariya and zaniya. These are the words Ibn Kathir uses. They thought of her as a shameless woman, a humiliated woman. But anyways, she points towards the baby. She doesn't speak, she points towards the baby. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He brings a miracle for Maryam. And that child, that newborn baby, Isa alayhi salam, he speaks up and he says, Inni Abdullah. I am the slave of Allah. Atani al-kitab. He gave me the book. Waja'alani nabiyya. And He made me a prophet. So on behalf of his mother, that newborn baby defended her. And he said, my mom is not a shameless woman as you think she is. She is a chaste woman. And I am a miracle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are two things that I want you to extract from this lesson. Remember what Maryam said? She said, well, mittu qabla hadha, I wish I die, and I wish I am deeply forgotten. So much so that no one ever remembers that someone named Maryam existed. But what was the decree of Allah? Allah revealed an entire surah in the Quran, and He dedicated it to Maryam. And He named it Surah Maryam. And He brings together her story. No one's birth is mentioned in the Quran. Maryam salamullah alayha, her birth is mentioned in the Quran. Right? So she wanted to be forgotten, but the decree of Allah was that her name and her memory will live on till the day of Qiyamah. How many Muslims are there? Over 1 billion, right? At some point, someone is reading the Quran. Someone is mentioning Maryam. Someone is remembering Maryam. Someone is speaking about her legacy. And what the Quran said. She wanted to be forgotten. The decree of Allah was that she would be remembered till the day of Qiyamah. Number one. The second point to take away is, if we was to judge Maryam salamullah alayha based on what her nation thought of her, what would come to your mind? They thought of her as a shameless woman, as a woman with no purity and no dignity. But in the eyes of Allah, there was not a woman more dignified than Maryam. There was not a woman more pure than Maryam. So much so that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, her people accused her of impurity. Allah in the Quran, He says, Ya Maryamu, inna Allah astafak. O Maryam, Allah has selected you. Wa tahharaki. And Allah has purified you. Allah testifies to the purity of Maryam salamullah alayha. So, what our rank is and what our position is before people and what the people assume of us is not what matters. What ultimately matters is our station, our rank before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We live in times where simply being a Muslim is a challenge. The views that we have, the aqidah that we have is assumed to be incompatible with the modern world. The Prophet ﷺ said, Bada al-Islamu ghariban. Islam started as something strange, something weird. وَسَيَعُودُ غَرِيبًا. And it will return to being something strange. Today, if you have the opinion of an Orthodox Muslim, everyone will think you're weird. LGBT, think about all of these opinions. If we have the opinion that Orthodox Islam teaches us, then you are assumed to be gharib, strange, incompatible. So we must always remember that it is ultimately our station, our rank before Allah, and what Allah assumes of us that matters, and not what people think of us. Because ultimately we will stand before Allah and we will be held accountable before Allah. I make dua, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand the Quran and allow us to incorporate in our lives the teachings of the Quran. آمين. اللهم صل على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا ومولانا محمد وبارك وسلم وصل عليه. اللهم أنت السلام ومنك السلام وإليك يرجع السلام. حينا ربنا بالسلام وأدخلنا الجنة دار السلام. تباركت ربنا وتعاليت يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. اللهم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا وإيمانا كاملا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا. وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين برحمته.
رمضان تجلى وابتسم